After a massive catastrophe, humanity lost the ability to sleep. People are increasingly resembling zombies, and their lives are gradually turning into a waking nightmare. One night a woman named Jill, working as a guard at a university, sneaks into an empty auditorium. There she discovers a stash of pills. Later during the day, Jill hands these pills over to a suspicious man named Greg in exchange for a substantial sum of money. On her way home, Jill suddenly falls asleep right in her car. She is woken up by her young daughter Matilda. At the doorway, an irritated grandmother appears, soon followed by Jill's elder son Noah. After gathering her children, Jill plans to take them with her. We see that the relationship between Noah and his mother is quite tense. On the way, Matilda closes her eyes and falls asleep. At that moment, the car radio suddenly shuts off and in the next instant, they get into an accident. The car plunges off a bridge into a lake, and the cabin starts filling with water. Jill and the children barely manage to escape, miraculously surviving. Matilda nearly drowns and Jill has to perform CPR on her. When they reach the shore, a police officer informs them that something strange is happening in the city. All electronics have suddenly stopped working. Jill, along with her children, heads to the nearest hospital, but due to the large number of casualties, they are unable to get the doctor's attention. Jill stitches up her wound herself. Something inexplicable occurs at the hospital. People who were in comas or under anesthesia start waking up, which is seen as a real miracle. Upon returning home, Jill and the children find an angry grandmother waiting for them. There is still no electricity, and mobile phones aren't working. After dinner, they wind up an old mechanical alarm clock and lay down to sleep. But Jill, as before, cannot close her eyes. She wanders around the house, looks at old photos, and hears noises from outside. Likely yet another neighborly quarrel. She tries to sleep again, but her mother-in-law, also suffering from insomnia, enters the room. Noah has the same problem. He watches the falling stars with his mother, and the only one who manages to sleep is little Matilda. The next day, Jill heads to work on her bike. Although it's nighttime, the streets are crowded with people, all unable to sleep. Greg spots her again and asks her to get more pills, preferably sedatives or sleeping aids. Jill promises to help and heads to the university. Despite the approaching dawn, armed soldiers arrive in the city, break into the university and find Jill. When asked what she did before, Jill admits that she once served in the army. They offer her a chance to return to service, but don't explain what's happening in the city. Later, Jill's colleague, Brian, reveals alarming information. People all over the world haven't been able to sleep for over 2 days. Jill's boss, Dr. Murphy, a psychiatrist, is trying to understand the cause of this mass insomnia. There is only one known woman who can still sleep. Recalling, Jill realizes that her daughter Matilda was asleep when she left for work. Sharing this with Brian, Jill quickly gets on her bike and races home. Noah tells her that their grandmother took Matilda to church. At the church, exhausted people gather to listen to the sermon of a weary priest. During the service, people learn that Matilda, unlike everyone else, sleeps soundly at night. Overcome with worry, Jill hurriedly packs her things at home. Brian bursts into her house, pleading insistently to take Matilda to Murphy's lab for research. But Jill refuses, fearing for her daughter's safety. Riots break out on the streets. People panic, looting pharmacies for sleeping pills, as their brains can no longer cope with the strain without sleep. Meanwhile, Matilda falls asleep right in the church, and the priest presents her to the congregation as a miracle, as if she were a gift from above. However, when the girl wakes up, some religious fanatics suggest sacrificing her, believing it's the only way to save everyone. At that moment, Jill, Noah and Brian burst into the church. Jill demands her daughter back, but the fanatics refuse. Brian tries to explain that Matilda is essential for creating a cure that could save everyone, but the fanatics do not believe in science. The situation escalates, and the local sheriff shoots Brian. Panic ensues. People scatter and Noah manages to grab Brian's wallet, which contains the address of the laboratory. Matilda manages to escape, but the sheriff threatens her grandmother with a weapon. Jill finds her daughter, and to the sound of gunfire, they manage to flee into the forest. Hiding among the trees, Noah insists on going to the lab, claiming it's their only chance since Matilda won't survive without them. Overcoming her fears, Jill agrees, although she worries that the lab might subject her daughter to cruel experiments. Deciding to acquire transport, Jill heads to her acquaintance Greg, only to find that he has already been dealt with, likely by competitors who have taken over. She patiently waits for the competitors to leave the building and steals the keys to one of their vehicles. Now they have a way to reach the lab. Matilda, barely seated in the back, falls into a sweet sleep, unaware of the trials that await her. On the road, Jill notices something unusual, a car involved in a serious accident, with signs of a shootout. The driver is severely wounded but, oddly, cannot lose consciousness from the pain. This person turns out to be the sheriff. Jill takes his weapon, and they continue their journey. Jill has a feeling that the sheriff was shot by people working for Dr. Murphy, the psychiatrist and sleep specialist known for her lack of scruples. However, they have no other choice and are forced to move forward. As they continue, they encounter a group of people who look like zombies, many of whom appear erratic from sleep deprivation. Jill decides to stop at a library. She needs a map to continue their journey. During this time, she also decides to teach her daughter Matilda how to use a gun, but the girl refuses. Irritated, Jill fires at one of the shelves, almost hitting Noah. Nearby, another group appears on the street, this time dressed in prison uniforms. Escaped convicts who seem to have taken advantage of the city's chaos. One of them approaches the car where Matilda is sleeping, while Jill and Noah struggle with the map. A difficult task after several days without sleep. Hearing a noise, Jill realizes Matilda is in danger. When they rush outside, one of the convicts steals their car while the others surround them. Jill tries to scare them off, firing a bullet into the ground, but it turns out to be her last. The situation is dire. Unexpectedly, they are saved by another convict, who had taken their car. He introduces himself as Dodge and explains that the guards, exhausted from insomnia, opened the prison. Seizing the moment, he takes Jill's gun, but she tells him it's out of bullets. Dodge takes the car keys and heads off with Noah to search for gasoline and new clothes. When he learns that Jill and her children are heading to the lab to create a cure, he decides to join them and returns the gun to Jill. Jill begins teaching Matilda to drive, while Dodge shares his thoughts, believing modern education corrupts children and suggesting that books should be burned, so humanity can start fresh. Soon, they encounter another danger. A group of people seemingly engaged in a sacrificial ritual blocks their path. The fanatics start attacking them, shattering the car windows, but Jill and her companions manage to fight them off and escape the dangerous area. The lab is already close, and Dodge decides to leave, taking the car with him. Jill and the kids continue on foot, and she decides to go ahead to check if it's safe, asking the kids to stay nearby in one of the small cabins. The lab is guarded by armed soldiers, but as a former soldier, Jill manages to slip inside undetected. She puts on a medical coat and finds the room where an elderly woman, rumored to still be able to sleep, is kept. The old woman looks exhausted and in poor condition. Jill pretends to be a nurse assigned to take a blood sample from the woman. Quietly, she asks the elderly woman to help her daughter when everyone starts dying from insomnia. At that moment, Dr. Murphy appears. The scientist admits that they haven't found a cure. They can only temporarily stimulate brain function, but it's a short-term solution. Murphy offers Jill a chance to join them, but Jill, exhausted and defeated, goes outside and sits on the ground. Meanwhile, Dodge arrives with Noah and Matilda, but they are quickly detained by soldiers. Jill, in a panic, tries to protect her daughter, but is unable to intervene. Matilda cries, pleading with the soldiers to spare her because she can sleep, which piques the scientist's interest. Morning arrives, and Matilda sees the brutal experiments being conducted on monkeys in the lab. The girl meets Dr. Murphy, who decides to test the effects of ether on her. Matilda falls asleep instantly, while Jill is held in a locked room. Murphy, seeing Jill barely aware of her surroundings, visits her and then decides to release Dodge, giving him an energy cocktail, the only way to keep lab staff functioning. Soon, the elderly woman's condition worsens, and she stops breathing. The scientists attempt to revive her with a defibrillator, but all efforts are unsuccessful. In despair, Noah accuses his mother of only caring about saving Matilda, neglecting his own fate. A guard intervenes and takes Noah away, as the lab staff gradually lose their grip on reality. The soldiers, losing control, begin confusing objects, mistaking a pine cone for a grenade, which leads to a massive shootout that kills many of the lab workers. In the chaos, Jill manages to free herself and pushes through the crowd of deranged soldiers, finding her daughter. At this moment, Dr. Murphy holds a scalpel to Matilda's neck. Another doctor suddenly injects Jill, but forgets to remove the air from the syringe, causing her to lose consciousness. It turns out the doctor did this deliberately to save the girl. Matilda and Jill try to hide from the soldiers' gunfire. They find Noah, but he gets shocked by an exposed wire and loses consciousness. Matilda runs to get a defibrillator and Jill, in her confused state, uses it incorrectly, resulting in both her and her children receiving the shock. Morning comes, revealing the aftermath of a brutal shootout. Jill has been lying on the floor all this time. Matilda wakes up, and soon Noah as well, who didn't die but had merely fallen asleep and even dreamed. At that moment, a man with a gun appears. Jill, gathering her last bit of strength, stands up, attempting to protect her children. The man hesitates, then lowers his weapon. Jill appears drained and incredibly weakened, having been pushed to her limits by the lack of sleep. Matilda, now the most alert, starts piecing things together. Noah's heart had indeed stopped, but the defibrillator shock restarted it, just like what happened to Matilda when she received CPR after the car accident. Realizing this, the children decide that death and subsequent resuscitation might be the only way to regain the ability to sleep. In desperation, they help Jill to reach the lake, where she must briefly drown so they can bring her back to life. Their plan works, they perform CPR, and she revives. This is where the movie ends. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel.